an early April morning in the Circhio Valley in Tuscany, Italy. It's 1945, and the country has spent the last few years overrun with Nazi and Axis soldiers. But if tonight's operation goes the right way, that may soon end. A small unit of American soldiers quietly get to work. They are unpacking the latest technology to use against Germany's Gothic line of artillery. They don't know the Germans' exact location, but it's out there, somewhere. As they finish unpacking the boxes, what they start putting together isn't guns, or missiles, or artillery. No, they're unpacking and putting together huge speakers. And those speakers are placed close to inflatable, life-sized tanks. This mission isn't designed to destroy the Nazi artillery line. It's meant to fool it. These soldiers are members of the 3133rd Signal Service Company, which is part of the highly classified Ghost Army. These soldiers gathered in Pine Camp, New York, a year earlier and recorded every single sound associated with tanks, building bridges, artillery units, and anything else that takes place around a battlefield. And it's all been collected on state-of-the-art wire technology. And here, in the field, it will be used to fool the German soldiers into believing that the Allies have gathered to mount an attack. In reality, the 92nd Division is waiting miles away, near the coast, ready to attack. But they're not sure where the Germans have their artillery, so this Ghost Army mission is key to the entire operation. The recreation of the tank battalion gets louder and louder. It sounds so realistic that even some members of the Ghost Army start to think that there must be some tanks right there. They back away, leaving their sonic weapons to do all the work. And then, a couple hours later, the Germans start to fire. The German attack is successful, and it destroys some of the large speakers and 24 of the 35 dummy tanks that have been set up. But now that the exact location of the German artillery has been exposed, the real mission can take place. And within 2 weeks, the last Nazi line of soldiers in Italy had been eliminated. And a major reason for this was the deception work of the Ghost Army. Conceived in 1944 by Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll, the Ghost Army was a unit of over 1,000 American officers and soldiers that undertook large-scale deceptions in the final year of World War II, involving fake tanks, false radio signals, and sonic setups. It's estimated that they saved thousands of lives in the process, yet their exploits and bravery weren't known to the public for decades after the war ended. But earlier this year, the unit's members were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, a fitting tribute for one of the most fascinating battalions in U.S. Army history. In today's episode, our hosts sit down with writer and historian Rick Beyer, who not only has co-written a book and produced a documentary about the Ghost Army, but played a key role in campaigning for their congressional recognition. He talks about how he discovered the story of the unit, details some of its missions, and then reveals how much of an impact they have had on his own life. And then, in a very special segment at the end, we have a quick conversation with Seymour Nussenbaum, one of the 3 Ghost Army veterans that attended the gold medal ceremony earlier this year. Seymour sadly passed away shortly after our chat, so you'll be able to hear his final words on his time with the unit. I'm Carrie Varo-Heikis, and this is Army Matters.
Army Matters is brought to you by Sikorsky, a Lockheed Martin company. The Black Hawk helicopter. It's an American institution and a global icon. It's a proven performer, a lifesaver, and a force multiplier. And as the world changes, the Black Hawk is evolving to stay ahead. Learn how at lockheedmartin.com/Blackhawk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Army Matters. I am your co-host, the 15th Sergeant Major of the Army, retired Sergeant Major of the Army, Dan Dailey. And I'm here with my good friend,
the 66th Inspector General of the United States Army, Lieutenant General retired Leslie C. Smith. And I'm glad to be back with my good buddy, Dan Dailey.
You know, the listeners are excited that we're back together this week.
Yeah. Why?
You know what? I think they feel the same way I do, Les. When you're gone, it's like a little part of me's not there.
It's a song, isn't it? We should start singing, but I can't remember what it is.
No, let's get
There's
back
a
into
song.
the episode. To the episode, please.
Okay, to the episode. All right, let's talk about it.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
All right. So what is the most inspirational military ceremony you've ever attended? Inspirational.
How about my retirement? That was inspirational.
I was there, wasn't I?
Yeah, it was pretty nice, wasn't it?
It was. That was emotional.
And it was inspirational too, right? Because it was during COVID, right? But the soldiers did the things they were supposed to do. But I would say especially the 4-star ceremonies that you see, when they're outside on the field there, those are pretty inspirational, too. And I'll also, if I could finish one other thing, every basic combat training graduation,
very inspirational.
Very
I would say,
inspirational.
Yeah. For an inspirational, that would be it.
Yeah. And why would you say that, Dan? We've been to hundreds of them. Why are they so inspirational?
Every single one of them is not less inspirational than the last.
But why?
I guess when you look into the crowd, I've spoken a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And you look in the crowd and you see the amazement of the mothers and fathers, aunts, uncles, nephews, cousins, grandparents of how proud they are of their son or daughter that stands out there. It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be great if we could package that up and share that with the United States. Yeah.
Sell it in 6-packs and we'd get rich. Right?
6 packs of inspiration.
Oh gosh. I mean, we could be billionaires.
Well, we kind of do sell it, right?
I know.
Little snippets at a time.
We're not charging enough, though.
Oh, okay. Well,
we got to commercialize it.
Well, you got to figure out how to commercialize it. So why are we talking about all this stuff, Dan? Why?
Well, Les, the reason why we're talking about ceremonies today is because not too long ago, an unknown unit called the Ghost Army in World War II received the Congressional Gold Medal for the things they did. And here to talk about them, the Ghost Army, is Mr. Rick Beyer.
Hey, Rick, welcome to Army Matters.
Hey, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, Rick, to start things out, I need to ask you about a series of books that you did called The Greatest Stories Never Told. Which of the stories in that series do you think is the most interesting?
So, in 1862, well, I'll tell you what the story's about, first of all. My favorite story is the story of how 3 cigars changed the course of the Civil War.
Ooh, I've never heard that.
Do you know this story?
I do not.
Okay. So it's September 1862, and the Confederate Army is, under Robert E. Lee, is invading the North, and coming down trying to meet them is the Union Army under General George McClellan. And McClellan is like the most overcautious general ever to wear Union blue. And he is trying to find Lee, but he's not doing a great job of it. If he doesn't find him, Lee might be able to invade the North, win a battle, and France would recognize the Confederacy, and the war would be over. And at this point, I think it's September 14th or 15th, the Union Army's camped out in Maryland, and a soldier in the Union Army, Barton W. Mitchell, looks down on the ground and he sees 3 cigars, and they're wrapped in paper. And it's like, great, because he's with 2 other guys. So it's one for me, one for you, one for him. And he's about to throw that paper away when he stops and he looks at it. And what this Union soldier has found is the marching orders for the Confederate Army. Some Confederate officer had them, he had wrapped the cigars in them, and then he'd lost it.
Oh my
So
God.
Barton W. Mitchell hands this up the line to his superior, up, it goes all the way to McClellan. McClellan says, with this paper, if I can't whip Bobby Lee, I'm willing to go home. And he launches his army into action. And the result is the Battle of Antietam.
Oh.
The bloodiest single day in American history.
Yep.
Although it's a kind of a draw, Lee is forced to withdraw back to the South. Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, and none of it would have happened except for three cigars.
And Hank McClellan was blamed for not chasing Lee after that battle, because I guess he didn't chase him and try to finish him off.
Right. Well, and then after the election in November, the congressional election, Lincoln replaced him.
Yeah, I've never heard that one before. Never.
Well, there you go. So that's one. There's 499 others in those books. You can read through them and see how many you know.
Rick, that is interesting. I got to check that out. Now, what initially sparked your interest in history?
So when I was a kid, my dad was a physics professor at Brown University. So he was a scientist.
Good school. Mm-hmm.
But he was also somebody who was interested in language, interested in art, and especially interested in history. You know, we had the Civil War history books, and I would take them off the shelf and look at the maps, the American Heritage series. I had the Time Life history series in my room. That was a series of history books of American history. And I was interested in history really from a very, very young age. And it's funny because I didn't major in history in college. I just assumed history was that thing that was fun. It was like not for work or not for study per se. And I actually started my career as a journalist. And it wasn't until the late 1990s when I started to work on this giant project of history minutes for the History Channel that I suddenly realized I can take this area that I'm personally interested in and I can make money with it. And that was like kind of launched me on my career, making documentary films, writing history books, speaking about history and all that. So that's been the last 25, 26 years. And it's been awesome. It's just, it's fantastic. And I so love history.
Yeah, I have a love for history that's deep as well. And you mentioned fun. So you're known for making history fun and entertaining. Why is it so hard for many people to approach history that way?
I think maybe in high school, you know, history is not the most popular topic. So it's the guy who's at the low end of the totem pole who gets to be the history teacher and who maybe doesn't care about it that much. But I was just saying to somebody the other day, I think that humor is a really important part of history. I mean, it's just not all dead people and dates. It's stories of, you know, at one point, you know, if I look at history this way, and I realize this isn't what you asked. I'm doing that political thing where you shift the question to what you want to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I did that all the time. I testified to Congress.
You know, when it happens, you know, it's not something set in stone. You're in a moment where anything can happen. We can win this battle. We can lose this battle. And it depends on, you know, what I do, what you do, kind of what all happens in the moment. And and I think when you look at history that way and you suddenly realize that at any point in history, it could shoot off in a different direction than it did, that it suddenly becomes a lot more fascinating.
So Rick, how did you learn about the Ghost Army?
So January 2005, got an email from my former business partner, Mark Tomizawa, and he said, hey, I'm serving on a board with this woman. Her uncle was in a crazy World War II unit that used inflatable tanks and sound effects to fool the Germans on the battlefields of Europe. And she just found out about it, and she thinks somebody ought to make a documentary about this. Would you be willing to talk to her? So I said, okay. And we set up a meeting a few days later in a Starbucks. And she walked in, she was carrying an armload of 3-ring binders. Mind's eye now, as I think about it, I feel like they're piled up higher than her head. That's not really the case, but that's sort of how the story gets exaggerated. And those were her uncle's wartime scrapbooks.
Wow.
And so I sat there leafing through his scrapbooks. His name was John Jarvie. And he was an artist, so it included some of the artwork that he had done when he was in the U.S. Army, and learning about this story and learning about how artists are involved in this story. And I got hooked pretty quickly. And I pitched it to the History Channel, who I had done a lot of work for, and they weren't interested in the story for a variety of reasons. They felt they had done deception. They didn't like the art aspect. So I had to kind of think, okay, well, I'd only really done work for the History Channel at that point. I wanted to try to maybe make this documentary film about this unit for PBS, but I had to raise the money myself. And I finally said those words, those very dangerous words, well, how hard can it be? And that's what got me started on the 8-year project to make the Ghost Army documentary film.
Okay. All right. Rick, can you tell us who came up with the idea for the Ghost Army?
So Ralph Ingersoll and Billy Harris were the guys who dreamed up the Ghost Army. And Ralph Ingersoll had been a celebrity author, famous left-wing journalist. The New York Times described him as a prodigiously energetic egotist. He had a reputation for being a liar and who could BS people. But he gets drafted, actually. He ends up as an officer. And in 1943, he's working for the Special Plans Branch of the U.S. Army in London. And his boss there is Colonel Billy Harris. And Billy Harris is almost the exact opposite of Ralph Ingersoll. He's a button-down, by-the-book, West Point graduate. His entire family are Army officers, and most of them become generals, and he'll become a general eventually. And his mother is the person who introduced Dwight Eisenhower to Mamie Dowd. Okay, that's how entrenched in the Army Billy Harris is. So now these two guys are working together. In regular life, they probably never would have even had a cup of coffee together, but they're thrown together by the war. And it's a great partnership because Ralph Ingersoll is the pie in the sky. Hey, let's try this. Let's do a deception unit guy. And Billy Harris is the feet on the ground. Well, how do we make this work? How can this work within the Army system? And together they dream up the idea of this tactical deception unit capable of basically impersonating a couple of divisions and making it seem like they're about to attack, they're on the move, they're pulling back, whatever it is, on the battlefield to German observers.
Wow. Okay, so describe how they recruited the artists to devise and work on those deceptions that the unit was planning.
So the Ghost Army was dreamed up and approved in December 1943. And they didn't have much time. So they had to take pre-existing units and put them together to make up this deception unit, which was officially called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. And to do the visual deception, they said, oh, well, we'll take a camouflage unit. So they picked the 603rd Camouflage Engineers. Well, this was a unit that had heavily recruited artists into it. Because if you're going to do camouflage, you want to have artists who have an eye for that sort of thing. And so probably about 40 to 50% of the 603rd had been young art students. Maybe they were sign painters. Maybe they were designers already working. But the Army had looked for them. They had brought them together in this unit. And so you had this tremendous amount of artistic ability, which once they're in Europe, they're creating these deceptions, but in their spare time, they're painting and sketching. And I always think this is an amazing part of the story. There's thousands of artworks that these guys created in Europe, everything from orphan children to bombed out churches to painting bridges destroyed by Allied bombing. And I feel like it's a window into World War II that's really different than what you see in photographs or moving images. And so I think that's a pretty important part of the story. But that's why there's artists in the unit. And I think it's important to say it's 1,100 guys who are in the 23rd. There's maybe 160 or so who are artists, maybe a little bit more than that. It's not like it's most of the unit. It's a small part of it, but I think it's an important part.
So another unit in the Ghost Army was the 3132nd Signal Service Company. Can you tell us a little bit more about that unit?
The 3132nd is the Sonic Deception Company. So let me back up and say the Ghost Army is a multimedia unit. It goes to war with 3 types of deception: Visual, right? That's all the inflatable tanks to fool enemy aerial reconnaissance. Sonic, right? To play the sounds of troops on the move, troops moving in. And then radio. So those are the three main types of deception that they're doing.
So like Radio Free Europe before
no,
it was
radio
started?
like radio for a division. Like a division
sound.
would have a radio at division, regiment,
transmissions,
battalion, right?
Yep.
So if you have just the radio operators, let's say you have 30 radio operators and radio sets, you can impersonate an entire division to the enemy. But the sound is really interesting because it was really new technology in 1944. And they sent guys down with a recording truck to the Army Proving Ground at Fort Knox. They recorded all sorts of sounds, tanks driving down the road, tanks going up a hill, changing gears, going down a hill, guys digging in, people putting together pontoon bridges to get them ready for a river crossing. And they recorded all these the same way they recorded hit records. They recorded on a glass transcription disc. But then in Europe, for any particular deception, like we need this sound and then this sound and then this sound, they could mix that all together onto a wire. And the wire is, you know what a tape recorder is, right? So the predecessor of the tape recorder is a wire recorder where you're recording on magnetized wire that's the thickness of fishing line. I was about to reach for one and try to show it to you, but I'm not even sure that you could see it because it's so thin.
It's fishing lines. You're not supposed to be able to see it.
Right, but 6 feet of it is 1 second of sound. Right? So
6 feet of it, okay.
6 feet of it. So that was brand new technology in 1944. And it was apparently very effective because it fooled enemy soldiers, it fooled American soldiers and units alongside. And I love the story. One of the officers in the Sonic unit, Dick Syracuse, said after a while it started to fool him. He said he began to see tanks when there weren't really any there, but he kept thinking, well, wait a minute, I know we're playing tank sounds, but I think maybe I see a real tank. He said it was psychologically unnerving how effective that sonic deception was.
So they created fake tanks, fake radio transmissions, and a bunch of other things. How successful were these operations?
So the Ghost Army was very successful in some of their deceptions. I don't think every deception was bought by the Germans, but there were a few of them that had a major impact. And the one that had the biggest impact was their last deception, Operation Viersen. This was in March 1945. The Ninth Army is prepared to cross the Rhine River as part of General Montgomery's offensive. And they're going to be launching with 2 divisions, the 30th and the 79th, across the Rhine. And the 23rd is tasked with pretending to be the 30th and 79th and pretending that they're going to cross the Rhine 15 miles to the south. This is a massive deception plan. They add other units to assist the men of the 23rd. They've got hundreds of inflatables. They run sonic deception 4 nights in a row. They've got radio, special effects. They're all kind of cooking full speed. And when the 30th and 79th crossed the Rhine, they did so with minimal casualties, and the enemy was completely unprepared for them. General William Simpson, who commanded the Ninth Army, wrote a letter of commendation to the 23rd. And it's a wonderful letter because it doesn't say what they did, because it's secret. It says essentially, you did something very important and you did it really well. And we're commending you for this important thing done really well. Thanks.
But we can't talk about it.
But we're not going to say what it is. That was the only commendation that they received in the war. But that deception may have saved thousands of lives. There's a few other deceptions they did. The one at Bettenberg stands out for me, where they held a weak spot in Patton's line for 8 days in September 1944. That was very successful. So I think there's no question that the unit paid back what was put into it.
We're brought to you by Sikorsky, a Lockheed Martin company. The Black Hawk helicopter is modernizing for the 21st century security missions with a new engine that's 50% more powerful, a digital backbone for faster technology upgrades, and an onboard team of drones to counter advanced threats. Learn more at lockheedmartin.com/Blackhawk.
Join AUSA, the Army's premier professional association and host of the largest land power exposition in the United States. AUSA is open to everyone, including all ranks and components. So whether you have a relationship with the U.S. Army or simply want to honor those who serve, you can learn more at ausa.org/join.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Army Matters. Now, Rick, many of the soldiers who were in the Ghost Army went on to have very successful post-war careers. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Let me give you a couple of names. Bill Blass and the photographer Art Kane.
Yeah, so many of the guys had successful careers, and a few of them went on to become quite famous. Bill Blass, the fashion designer, was a kid from Indiana in this unit, 21 years old, apparently having the time of his life. He had a big smile on his face in every picture I see, but he went on to become a world-famous fashion designer. Ellsworth Kelly, famous minimalist painter and artist who was very shy. People almost barely remember him, but there's pictures of him. We know he was in the unit. And he went on, of course, to win the Presidential Medal and all sorts of other stuff. Art Kane, he went on to become a photographer, took that very famous picture of all 57 jazz musicians on a stoop in Harlem. And a guy who I like to remember, Arthur Singer, who became a very famous wildlife artist, illustrated the book Birds of North America. I mean, I think today, if you buy Birds of North America, it's still Art Singer's illustrations in it. And he and one of his sons did the Birds and Flowers of the 50 States postage stamp series back in the 1980s, if you remember those. There's a whole bunch of people who have fascinating careers, record executives or creative people, professors, TV executives, all sorts of interesting stuff. And I mean, I suppose that would be true of any U.S. Army unit in World War II, but it's really interesting looking at what they did in World War II to then see what they did after World War II.
That's incredible. You worked really hard to get the Ghost Army recognized with the Congressional Gold Medal. How did that start, and what was the journey like?
Well, okay, so we're going to go into the second and third hour of the Army Matters podcast now.
That's right.
Back in 2014, the book had just come out. And by the way, the book is, I hope you'll mention, it's co-authored by Elizabeth Sales. And Elizabeth is no longer with us. She passed away a couple of years ago. But she was the daughter of a Ghost Army veteran. And we worked really hard on this book and other projects. And she was a tremendous collaborator and partner. But the book was just coming out, and I was looking for a way to honor this unit. We've done the documentary, the book's about to come out, and people were asking me, why haven't they been honored? And so we were looking at how we should do it and what were the rules. Could you try to talk to the Army about getting them a presidential unit citation? And around that time, the Monuments Men had just been awarded their gold medal. And I thought, that seems like a good answer to this because I can see what the process is. And again, I said these words that I really should just erase from my vocabulary. How hard can it be? And so I called up a friend of mine from college, Annie Custer, who was a Democratic congresswoman from New Hampshire. I said to her, Annie, will you work with me on getting this gold medal? And eventually we had Democratic and Republican co-sponsors in the House and Senate. And one of the things you have to do on a gold medal bill, different than any other bill, is you have to get 2/3 of the House and Senate to co-sponsor the legislation. So you have to convince 350 congressmen and senators one by one that they want to put their names on this. Not just that they're going to support it, but that they're going to put their names on it. They're going to back it. So the first couple of years were sort of a very slow start, but eventually we got it together. And after about 5 or 6 years, we really started to build momentum. But it took 7 years from the moment we started lobbying until both houses of Congress passed the bill and the president signed the bill. And then it was another 2-year design process because this is a custom designed medal. And then the final ceremony happened in March this year at the U.S. Capitol. And it was absolutely incredible. We had 600 people there. Most of them were family members of Ghost Army soldiers. And I got to tell you, the scene that really affected me the most, we were in a holding room and we had 3 veterans of the Ghost Army with us. The scene that affected me the most, we're in a holding room with the veterans and the folks from the Army and the politicians who are all there. And the three guys are sitting down in these seats. And in front of the three veterans, on their knees, talking to them, are the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, the Commander of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Secretary of the Army. And they're all on their knees, each of them talking to one of these veterans. They interact with veterans a lot, and I suppose that's not that unusual a thing. But I noticed none of the politicians were on their knees talking to the veterans. But I noticed that the military leadership was. And I took a picture of that. And that is the moment that for me was the most amazing. I mean, the ceremony was great. The speeches were great. To have the original gold medal presented to the veterans, it was a stunning day. But that moment in the holding room really captured it all for me.
Yeah. Demonstrates humility. Absolute humility.
So one of the Ghost Army veterans that attended the award ceremony was Seymour Nussenbaum. And we're going to hear from him at the end of the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit more about Seymour?
Yeah, so Seymour lives in Monroe Township, New Jersey. He's 100 years old,
wow,
which is an average age or below average for a Ghost Army survivor. But Seymour served in the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, and he called me about, 11 years ago or so. And he said, well, I've got these scrapbooks, and I'm not quite sure what to do with them. I'd like to donate them someplace. And I went down to look at them, and he had these two amazing scrapbooks, beautifully curated. And Seymour's been a stamp collector since he was 6 years old. Believe me, he knows how to curate a scrapbook. And he had maps, commentary, photos, artwork, tickets to shows, and he had postcards. He just had amazing stuff. And one of the things he had in the scrapbooks is he had samples of the fake patches that they made as part of their special effects deceptions. Now, we haven't talked about special effects, but that was something they developed on the ground in Europe after their first couple of deceptions. And it basically involved physically impersonating a unit. So if we're going to impersonate the 79th Division, we should be wearing a 79th Division patch. We should put their bumper markings on our trucks. We should drive them back and forth through town to make it look like the 79th Division's really busy here doing something. We should go into bars wearing these patches and talk about our commander. Anything for enemy spies who are left behind. So I knew that they had made these counterfeit shoulder patches, but Seymour had samples of them in his scrapbook, and he estimated they'd made 40,000 counterfeit patches for both deceptions they carried out and deceptions that they were planning that they never got to. I said, you should definitely donate these and they were crumbling. Their pages were crumbling. And then eventually we donated them to the National World War II Museum, and that's where they are now. And he was there at the ceremony in Washington. And if you meet him, you would think, oh, he doesn't have much to say or he's kind of quiet, but he's actually got a wicked sense of humor, but he kind of waits to launch it at you. So you don't really get a sense of that until maybe you've asked him the third question and suddenly he's like, boom, hits you with something. You're like, oh my God, this guy is all there. He's just kind of been holding it back. But it's been great to know him and to talk to him over the years.
So I would imagine that you must have formed a lot of very close relationships with the veterans you got to meet.
And over the years, I've had, how do I say this? I have come to appreciate my relationship with the Ghost Army soldiers as one of the greatest things in my life, because here's this group of guys who are 20 years older than I am, who did this amazing thing, and I have been privileged to be able to tell their story and make what they did known to the world. But I've also been privileged to know them personally, to have dinner in their houses, to exchange phone calls and letters and such, and that has just been a tremendously positive experience for me.
Yeah. So Rick, if our listeners want to watch the documentary or read the book, where can they go? Where can they get it?
So the documentary film's available on Amazon. Might cost you $3.99, but it's there, called The Ghost Army. The book is available pretty much any place that you can buy books. It's also called The Ghost Army by Rick Beyer and Elizabeth Sales. And yeah, check out our website for more information that doesn't cost you anything, ghostarmy.org, which is the official website of the Ghost Army Legacy Project.
Well, Rick, thanks for sharing your story, but most importantly, thanks for highlighting the incredible accomplishments of those great soldiers during World War II. And we appreciate you joining our show today.
Thank you so much.
As you heard earlier, we were able to reach out to Ghost Army veteran Seymour Nussenbaum in September of this year to ask him a few questions. 3 weeks after we chatted with him on October 4th, Seymour passed away at the age of 101 years old, making this his final interview about the Ghost Army. We asked him, what does it feel like to have the unit awarded the Congressional Gold Medal?
It feels very special. Maybe a little overdone, but it's special.
And what did Seymour do in the Ghost Army?
Well, my biggest job was to reproduce the shoulder patches of the outfits that we were imitating. And that meant getting an actual patch, measuring it, making templates for it, ordering special colors if we had to, and making them.
We then asked him what his favorite memory of his time in the war was. It wasn't a specific Ghost Army moment, but rather a traveling sketch comedy show he did while overseas.
On the good side was contributing to and helping to write, helping to direct the presentation that we put on, which had nothing to do really with Army work, but that pleased me more than anything else, other than being discharged.
And finally, we asked him what he told everyone he had done after the war, knowing that the Ghost Army's exploits were completely classified. He smiled and said this, very drolly.
Well, I told them that I blew up tanks.
Which was, of course, 100% accurate. We'd like to thank Seymour's grandson, Daniel Ziv, for recording this audio with him. And we here at Army Matters give our condolences to all of Seymour's family. He was truly a soldier for life.
Join the U.S. Army at the Total Army Career Fair on Friday and Saturday, November 1st through the 2nd at the SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Admission and parking are free. Did you know that the Army employs more than 265,000 civilians who provide support and assistance to our troops? This free recruiting event is open to anyone interested in either a civilian or military career. Recruiters will offer on-the-spot hiring opportunities for positions in a variety of career fields, including healthcare, education, accounting, music, and STEM. So come to the Total Army Career Fair to be all you can be as a soldier or a civilian. Army Matters is brought to you by Sikorsky, a Lockheed Martin company. The Black Hawk is the workhorse of the Army Division and will keep flying for decades to come. Thousands of skilled American workers produce this combat-proven helicopter. A new multi-year contract will keep production lines moving, while modernization keeps the aircraft at the cutting edge. Learn more at lockheedmartin.com/Blackhawk. To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Army Matters is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association. Member-supported, Army Connected. Visit us at ausa.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission, educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and supporters of a strong national defense. Today's episode was hosted by Lieutenant General Retired Les Smith and SMA Retired Dan Dailey, and anchor hosted by Carrie Barrow-Heckes. Anthony Dale Call is the producer and writer, and Andy Bosnack is the supervising sound editor. Ellen Toner is the content editor. Unzinga Curry is the executive producer, and the senior producers are Carrie Barrow-Heckes and LaSharon Duncan. Be sure to subscribe to Army Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. As you know, we love seeing stars in the Army, especially if it comes in the form of a 5-star review. AUSA's Army Matters podcast can also be heard on Reach Across America Radio on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app with the search of the word Reef. AUSA's Army Matters podcast primary purpose is to entertain. The podcast does not constitute advice or services. While guests are invited to listen, listeners, please note that you're not being provided professional advice from the podcast or the guest. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of AUSA. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. I'm LaSharon Duncan. Hope you have a great Army Day. Hooah!